All right, everybody, hello and welcome to your Unit 6 webcast. I'm going to give you a very short review of the things that you're going to need for Unit 6 quiz. But before I tell you that, I want you to know I'm working on your papers very, very hard, and I'm trying to get them back to you as soon as possible. What I can say is that from the ones that I have graded, there has been significant improvement, so that's awesome. And congratulations on completing your last paper for this class. Yay! Also, remember, I've had a couple emails after the fact, so after a quiz or after the paper, that have said, oh, I didn't understand this. So if you don't understand something, please, 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 I can't emphasize that enough. Let me know. I'm happy to walk you through anything that you don't understand. Don't ever go into an assignment not knowing what you're talking about, because that typically tends to show through. Okay, so for Unit 6, we focused on feminist theories, which, as you can tell, there are a lot of them. You had 2 PowerPoints on this, and Dr. Jurek's PowerPoint should really be able to help you out with this. They should definitely come in handy for the quiz, so if you have not listened and viewed them yet, I highly encourage you to do so. And you also need to have done the readings and watched the Kilborn movie in order to be prepared for the quiz. So first of all, your PowerPoint essentially discusses 3 waves of feminism. So this is typically how we think about feminist theory. You want to be able to look at the different waves. What was the first wave? When does it happen? Who was there? What was the second wave? What was it about? And when was it? What was the third wave? What was it about? When was it? Be able to distinguish those waves and to be able to recognize what they were doing and what the purpose was. Also, a big distinction is between liberal feminism and radical feminism. And so these differences are highlighted in Dr. Jurek's notes, which were also available to you in your shell. And so you want to be able to distinguish and to talk about the differences between liberal feminism and more radical feminism. Okay, so you were asked to read Mill and Mill, and these are examples of very early liberal feminists. And they're thinking about the idea that women should own property, which was actually a pretty radical concept then, particularly given that women were property. And so the notion of even having women own property was pretty amazing. They also were advocating for more rights. Again, a lot of the things that they're talking about are fairly radical given their times. Mill and Mill agree on a lot of things, but they do have some points of disagreement, and so I want you to make sure that you know where they agree and where they disagree. You also, in your PowerPoint, Dr. Jurek talks about an author by the names of Susan Miller Okin, who criticizes several of the male authors who do not factor in issues of family and women when they're making unreasonable assumptions about citizenship. So I want you to be able to talk about that and how Okin takes issue with Rawls. So as you can see, we're bringing in some of the theorists we've already talked about, so Mill and Rawls, and so you're going to want to be able to talk about them. You want to look at how is John Stuart Mill and what he thought that it was not enough to argue for women only to argue for women's rights. So he thought that you had to convince men that women should have more rights, given that men were the ones in power. So you want to be able to recognize how did he appeal to men of his day in order to get them to support women's rights. And I'll give you a hint. It wasn't just about them doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. It had to do with the changing nature of love and marriage. So you're going to want to be able to talk about that. So socialist feminists you also want to know a little bit about, and here we're going to revisit Marx, again, another theorist that we've already talked about. There were these were some of the schools of radical feminism, and they wanted to change 2 major institutions in society. So you need to be able to know what were the 2 major institutions that socialist feminists wanted to change. So ironically, socialist feminists and liberal feminists had differences for how, but they're an example of how socialist feminists wanted to radically transform institutions, but you want to be able to understand what their assumptions about human nature were. So they had similarities and differences, but one of the things is that you need to know is about human nature. So for socialist feminists and liberal feminists, what was their view on human nature? How are they similar? How are they different? Okay, so the next reading that you needed to do was Harris, and a lot of you talked about that in your posts. And so here, when she's in your quiz, I'm going to focus on having you talk about self and selves. And so you want to be able to understand what Harris is talking about when she's talking about the self. So often we tend to think about human beings as having some sort of coherent or consistent self, almost like there's this solid and tangible single self. Harris is taking issue with that. So you want to be able to know what she has to say about self. Okay, so lastly, you talked and read about queer theory. Okay, so there are several different things that were included in that article. And queer theory is going beyond just understanding people who label themselves as queer or as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or trans. You want to understand how queer is used as a verb. So for example, if we were to queer something or queering something, what might the idea of queering something like Christmas look like? Because this is applying to much broader implications of the notion of queering as a critical analytic tool, and it moves beyond this pure understanding of sexualities and identities. So again, you want to look at queer as a verb. And that's about it. So not too bad. This is your second to last quiz, and so you want to make sure that you are getting all the points that you can. Make sure you review the video, the PowerPoints, and the readings, and that you let me know if you have any questions. All right, have a great day.